The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Raven's Hollow Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors of the children's wing. Prince Alexander adjusted his tie as he walked briskly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the vast hallway. He had just finished a meeting with the foreign minister about trade agreements when his private secretary, James, appeared at his side with an urgent expression. "Your Highness," James whispered, slightly out of breath from hurrying to catch up.
"There's been a development in Princess Isabella's wing. The head of security requests your immediate presence."
Alexander's brow furrowed with concern. His 8-year-old daughter, Isabella, was the light of his life, and any mention of security issues involving her immediately commanded his full attention.
"What kind of development, James? Is she hurt?"
"No, sir, she's perfectly safe. But there appears to be some confusion regarding her medical care this morning. Captain Morrison is waiting for you in the medical suite." Without another word, Alexander quickened his pace, his mind racing with possibilities. The Royal Children's medical care was managed by a carefully vetted team of physicians and nurses, all of whom had undergone extensive background checks and security clearances. Any deviation from the established protocols was taken very seriously. As they approached the medical wing, Alexander could see Captain Morrison standing outside the door, his usual calm demeanor showing signs of tension. The security chief was a former military man with over 20 years of experience protecting the royal family. If something had unsettled him, it was certainly worth investigating. "Captain," Alexander called out as he approached. "What's the situation?" Morrison straightened and saluted briefly. "Your Highness, we have a nurse here who claims to have orders to administer a vaccination to Princess Isabella. However, when we checked with Dr. Thornfield's office, they have no record of any scheduled immunizations for today." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Thornfield had been the royal family's physician for over 15 years and was meticulous about maintaining detailed medical schedules. The idea that there could be confusion about Isabella's medical care was deeply troubling. "Where is this nurse now?" Alexander asked, his voice taking on a more authoritative tone. "She's in the waiting area, sir. We've asked her to remain while we sort this out. She seems quite insistent that she has the correct paperwork, but something doesn't feel right about the situation." Alexander nodded grimly. In his position, he had learned to trust the instincts of his security team. They were trained to notice things that others might miss, and their primary concern was always the safety of the royal family. "I want to speak with her myself," Alexander decided. "But first, where is Isabella?" "She's in her playroom with her governess, Miss Catherine. We thought it best to keep her occupied while we investigated the matter." "Good thinking. Now, let's see what this nurse has to say for herself." They entered the medical suite, a modern facility that had been installed in the palace several years earlier to provide immediate medical care for the royal family without the need to travel to outside hospitals. The waiting area was decorated in soft blues and greens, designed to be calming for young patients. Sitting in one of the chairs was a woman in her 30s wearing a standard nurse's uniform. She had brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and appeared professional, but Alexander noticed that she seemed nervous, repeatedly checking her watch and adjusting the medical bag beside her. "Nurse?" Alexander began, realizing he didn't know her name. "Henderson, Your Highness," the woman replied, standing quickly and offering a slight curtsy. "Nurse Sarah Henderson. I'm here to administer Princess Isabella's HPV vaccination as scheduled." Alexander studied her carefully. Something about her manner seemed off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion, Nurse Henderson. Our family physician has no record of any vaccination scheduled for today." The nurse's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I understand the confusion, sir, but I have the paperwork right here." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "Dr. Palmstar. Thornfield's office called yesterday to arrange this appointment. Perhaps there was a miscommunication." Alexander took the papers and examined them carefully. They appeared official, complete with letterhead from Dr. Watches, Thornfield's practice, and what looked like his signature. However, something nagged at him about the documents. "These papers indicate that Isabella is due for an HPV vaccination," Alexander said slowly. "But she's only 8 years old. Isn't that vaccination typically given to children who are 11 or older?" Nurse Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "There have been new guidelines, Your Highness. Some medical authorities are now recommending earlier vaccination in certain high-risk populations. High-risk populations? Alexander's voice carried a note of skepticism. What would make Princess Isabella high risk for anything? Well, given her public profile and the likelihood of international travel, Henderson began, but her explanation sounded rehearsed and unconvincing. Captain Morrison stepped forward. Your Highness, if I may. I took the liberty of calling Dr. Thornfield's office directly. They confirmed that they did not send anyone today and that no vaccinations are scheduled for Princess Isabella until her routine checkup next month. The color drained from Henderson's face. There must be some mistake, she said quickly. Perhaps the appointment was made through a different office. Sometimes when the royal family travels, arrangements are made through alternative channels. Alexander's patience was wearing thin. His protective instincts as a father were fully activated now, and he was becoming increasingly suspicious of this woman's true intentions. Nurse Henderson, he said in a tone that carried all the authority of his royal position, I'm going to ask you some very direct questions, and I expect honest answers. Who exactly sent you here today? Dr. Thornfield's office, as I mentioned. That's not true, Alexander interrupted. We've already confirmed that they didn't send you. So I'll ask again, who sent you? Henderson looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. Her nervousness was becoming more apparent by the minute. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. I may have mixed up my appointments. That's quite a significant mix-up, Alexander observed. Arriving at a royal palace with medical equipment, claiming to have authorization to inject a member of the royal family, and now suggesting it was all a scheduling error. Captain Morrison moved slightly closer to Henderson, not in a threatening manner, but in a way that made it clear she wouldn't be leaving until this matter was resolved. I think, Alexander continued, that we need to examine exactly what's in that medical bag of yours. Henderson instinctively pulled the bag closer to herself. These are standard medical supplies, Your Highness. Nothing unusual. Then you won't mind if we take a look, Morrison said, extending his hand toward the bag. Actually, Henderson said, standing up abruptly, I think there's been enough confusion for one day. Perhaps I should return when Dr. Thornfield is available to clarify the situation. I'm afraid that's not possible, Alexander stated firmly. You've come here claiming to have medical authorization to treat my daughter. Until we understand exactly what's going on, you're not going anywhere. The tension in the room was palpable. Henderson looked increasingly desperate, her eyes darting between Alexander and Morrison as she realized that her situation was becoming untenable. Your Highness, Morrison said quietly, I think we should call in our medical team to examine whatever is in that syringe she was planning to use. At the mention of examining the syringe, Henderson's composure finally cracked. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising slightly. This is very important. The princess needs this vaccination. There are health risks you're not aware of. What health risks? Alexander demanded. And how would you know about health risks that her own physician isn't aware of? Henderson was silent for a moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. There have been developments, new research. The standard vaccination schedule may not be adequate for children in high-profile positions. Alexander's suspicion was now turning to alarm. This woman was clearly not who she claimed to be, and her insistence on administering an unauthorized injection to his daughter was setting off every warning bell in his mind. Captain Morrison, he said without taking his eyes off Henderson, I want a full background check on this woman immediately. I also want our medical team to examine every item in that bag. Yes, sir, Morrison replied, already reaching for his radio to call for backup. Henderson made one last desperate attempt to maintain her cover. Your Highness, I understand your caution, but you're making a mistake. This vaccination is critical for Princess Isabella's health. If you delay it, you could be putting her at risk. The only risk I see here, Alexander replied coldly, is from someone who has lied repeatedly about their authorization to be here and who is carrying unknown medical substances that they want to inject into my child. As Morrison's backup arrived, Henderson finally seemed to realize that her mission, whatever it had been, was not going to succeed. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and she set down the medical bag without further protest. I want that bag secured immediately.
Alexander ordered. "Nothing is to be disturbed until our experts can analyze its contents. And I want this woman held until we can determine who she really is and who sent her here." As Henderson was escorted from the room, Alexander felt a mixture of relief and deep concern. He had potentially prevented something terrible from happening to Isabella, but the fact that someone had managed to get this close to his daughter with what appeared to be malicious intent was deeply troubling. Dr. Thornfield arrived within minutes of being called, his face grave with concern. "Your Highness, I can confirm that we had no appointments scheduled for Princess Isabella today. This woman is not known to our practice, and the documentation she provided is fraudulent." "What about the substance in the syringe?" Alexander asked. "Our lab team is analyzing it now," Dr. Thornfield replied. "We should have preliminary results within a few hours." Alexander nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead to the implications of what had just occurred. Someone had gone to great lengths to get close to Isabella with an unknown substance disguised as a routine vaccination. The level of planning and deception involved suggested this was no random act. "Captain," Alexander said to Morrison, "I want a complete review of our security protocols. How did this woman get past multiple checkpoints with fake credentials?" "Already underway, sir," Morrison replied. "We're reviewing all entry logs and interviewing everyone who came into contact with her." As the immediate crisis passed, Alexander realized that this incident was likely just the beginning of a much larger investigation. Someone had targeted his daughter, and he was determined to find out who and why. The thought of how close Isabella had come to being injected with an unknown substance made his blood run cold. If he hadn't arrived when he did, if the security protocols hadn't worked as designed, his little girl could have been seriously harmed or worse. Walking toward Isabella's playroom to check on her, Alexander reflected on the constant vigilance required to protect his family. The life of a royal came with many privileges, but it also came with unique dangers that most people never had to consider. Isabella looked up from her coloring book as he entered the playroom, her face lighting up with a smile that melted away some of his tension. "Papa!" she called out, running over to hug him. "Miss Catherine said you were in an important meeting. Are you finished now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Alexander replied, kneeling down to her level and holding her close. "I'm finished now." As he held his daughter, Alexander silently vowed that he would never let anyone get close enough to harm her again. Whatever investigation needed to be conducted, whatever security measures needed to be implemented, he would see it done. The incident with Nurse Henderson was over, but Alexander knew that the real work was just beginning. Someone out there had targeted his family, and he intended to find out who and make sure they never got another chance. The morning that had started with routine meetings and diplomatic discussions had become something far more serious. As Alexander watched Isabella return to her coloring, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the first move in a much larger game that he was only beginning to understand. The secure briefing room in the basement of Raven's Hollow Palace had been designed to discuss the most sensitive matters of state security. Its walls were lined with advanced soundproofing materials, and electronic countermeasures ensured that no outside surveillance could penetrate its defenses. It was here, 12 hours after the incident with the fake nurse, that Prince Alexander found himself surrounded by the kingdom's top security and intelligence officials. Director Patricia Blackwood of the Royal Intelligence Service sat across from Alexander, her silver hair pulled back severely and her pale blue eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. To her left sat Captain Morrison, still looking somewhat shaken by how close a potential threat had come to Princess Isabella. Dr. Thornfield occupied a chair near the head of the table. A thick folder of medical analysis reports spread before him. "Let me start with the medical findings," Dr. Thornfield began, adjusting his glasses as he opened the top file. "The substance in the syringe that Henderson was carrying has been thoroughly analyzed by our laboratory team and independently verified by specialists at the National Medical Research Institute." Alexander leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. The 12 hours since the incident had been filled with a mixture of relief at Isabella's safety and growing dread about what they might discover. "The syringe contained a compound that our experts have never seen before," Dr. Thornfield continued. "It appears to be some kind of experimental drug, possibly designed to affect neurological development in children. The implications are deeply troubling." Director Blackwood nodded grimly. "We've been working with international intelligence partners to try to identify this substance.
Similar compounds have been mentioned in classified reports from other countries, but this appears to be a more sophisticated version. What would it have done to Isabella? Alexander asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Based on our analysis, Dr. Thornfield replied carefully. The compound appears designed to cause subtle but permanent changes to cognitive development. It wouldn't have caused immediate harm, but over months or years it could have affected her ability to think critically, make independent decisions, or resist suggestion. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Someone hadn't been trying to harm Isabella physically. They had been attempting to alter her mind in ways that might not have been detected for years. "My God," Alexander whispered. "They were trying to turn her into some kind of puppet." "That's our assessment as well," Director Blackwood confirmed. "This level of sophistication suggests we're dealing with a well-funded organization with access to advanced pharmaceutical research. This isn't the work of a lone actor or even a typical criminal organization." Captain Morrison cleared his throat. "We've made significant progress in tracing Henderson's background as well. The identity she was using is completely fabricated, but we've been able to determine her real name through biometric analysis." He slid a photograph across the table to Alexander. It showed the woman who had attempted to inject Isabella, but now Alexander could see details that had been obscured by her professional disguise. Without the careful makeup and styled hair, her features were harder, more angular. Her eyes had a calculating intelligence that the nervous nurse persona had concealed. "Her real name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," Morrison continued. "She's a former pharmaceutical researcher who disappeared from a legitimate research position 3 years ago. Since then, she's been linked to several suspicious incidents involving children from prominent families in other countries." "Other countries?" Alexander asked sharply. "Are you saying this has happened before?" Director Blackwood nodded. "We've identified at least 4 similar incidents over the past 2 years. In each case, someone posing as a medical professional attempted to administer unauthorized treatments to children of high-ranking government officials or royalty. In 2 cases, they succeeded before the deception was discovered." The weight of this revelation settled over Alexander like a heavy blanket. Isabella hadn't been a random target. She had been selected as part of a larger pattern of attacks against the children of influential families. What happened to the children who were actually injected? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The effects were subtle at first," Dr. Thornfield replied. "The families initially noticed nothing unusual, but over time, the children began showing signs of decreased independence, increased susceptibility to suggestion, and gradual changes in personality. By the time the pattern was recognized, the effects appeared to be irreversible. Alexander felt a surge of rage that he struggled to control. The idea that someone was deliberately targeting children, using their innocence and vulnerability as weapons in some larger scheme, filled him with a fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Who's behind this?" he demanded. "What organization has the resources and motivation to carry out this kind of operation?" Director Blackwood exchanged a meaningful look with Morrison before responding. "We have strong suspicions, but we need to be careful about making accusations without ironclad proof. The intelligence we've gathered points to a shadowy organization known as the Meridian Group." "I've never heard of them," Alexander said. "That's intentional," Blackwood replied. "The Meridian Group operates in the shadows of international politics. Their membership appears to include wealthy industrialists, former intelligence operatives, and academics who share a particular ideology about social engineering and control." Social engineering? They believe that true stability and prosperity can only be achieved through careful manipulation of key individuals in positions of power. By influencing the next generation of leaders while they're still children, they hope to create a network of controllable decision-makers who will advance their agenda without even realizing they're being controlled. Alexander felt sick to his stomach. The scope and ambition of such a plan was staggering. "How long has this been going on?" "We believe the program began approximately 5 years ago," Morrison replied. "They've been extremely careful, targeting only a few children each year and using different methods and covers for each operation. If you hadn't intervened yesterday, we might never have uncovered the pattern." "So Isabella was selected because of her position in the line of succession," Alexander realized. "Almost certainly," Blackwood confirmed.
A future queen who had been subjected to their conditioning could potentially influence policy for decades without anyone realizing she was being manipulated. The briefing room fell quiet again as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just an attack on Alexander's family, it was an assault on the very foundations of democratic governance and free will.
"What's our next move?" Alexander asked finally. "We have several options," Director Blackwood replied.
Dr. Reddingus. Vasquez is currently being held in our most secure facility, but she's refused to cooperate with interrogation. We're hoping that the evidence we've gathered will eventually convince her to provide information about her handlers. "What about the other children who were affected?" Alexander asked. "Isn't there anything that can be done for them?" "Doctor," Thornfield looked up from his notes. "We're working with medical researchers in the affected countries to see if the neurological changes can be reversed. It's possible that with the right treatment, some of the damage could be undone, but we're still in the early stages of understanding how the compound works. I want those children to receive the best medical care available," Alexander declared. "Whatever resources are needed, whatever specialists need to be consulted, I'll personally ensure they get the help they need." "That's very generous, Your Highness," Blackwood said, "but we also need to consider our security posture going forward. The Meridian Group now knows that their operation against Princess Isabella has failed. They may try again, or they may shift their focus to other targets." Captain Morrison leaned forward. "We've already begun implementing additional security measures. All medical personnel who come into contact with the royal family will now undergo enhanced background screening. We're also establishing new protocols for verifying any medical procedures before they're carried out." "That's a good start," Alexander agreed. "But I want to go further than just defensive measures. These people tried to hurt my daughter and other children. I want them stopped permanently." Director Blackwood nodded approvingly. "We're working on that as well. Based on the intelligence we've gathered, we believe we can identify and locate other Meridian Group operatives, but dismantling an organization like this will require careful coordination with international partners. Then coordinate with them," Alexander said firmly. "Whatever resources you need, whatever diplomatic pressure needs to be applied, I'll make it happen. These people have declared war on innocent children, and I intend to make sure they lose." Over the next several hours, the group worked through the details of what would become a comprehensive counter-operation against the Meridian Group. Intelligence would be shared with allied nations, joint task forces would be established, and resources would be pooled to track down and neutralize the threat. As the meeting progressed, Alexander found himself thinking not just about Isabella, but about all the children who might be targeted in the future. The Meridian Group's plan was so insidious precisely because it attacked the most vulnerable members of society while appearing to provide medical care. "There's something else we need to discuss," Dr. Thornfield said as the formal briefing began to wind down. "We need to decide how much to tell Princess Isabella about what happened." Alexander had been dreading this conversation. Isabella had been kept away from the drama yesterday, told simply that there had been a scheduling mix-up with her medical appointment. But as she grew older, she would need to understand the realities of the dangers she faced. "She's only 8 years old," Alexander said slowly. "How do you explain to a child that someone tried to alter her mind?" "Perhaps we don't need to explain the full scope of what happened," Morrison suggested. "But she should understand that there are people who might try to hurt her by pretending to be doctors or other trusted figures." "Agreed." Alexander nodded. "She needs to be educated about these threats in an age-appropriate way. But I also want to make sure she doesn't live in fear. She should be cautious, but she should still be able to enjoy her childhood." Director Blackwood gathered her papers together. "We'll prepare a security briefing for the princess that explains basic safety concepts, without going into the more disturbing details. Children her age can understand the importance of verifying identities and following security protocols, without necessarily understanding why these measures are necessary." As the meeting finally concluded and the various officials departed, Alexander remained in the briefing room for a few minutes, processing everything he had learned. The world had suddenly become a more dangerous and complex place than he had previously realized. The idea that there were people sophisticated enough to develop mind-altering drugs and patient enough to implement a multi-year plan targeting children was deeply unsettling. It raised questions about how many other threats might be operating in the shadows, undetected and unchallenged. Walking back upstairs toward the family quarters, Alexander reflected on the strange intersection of luck and vigilance that had protected Isabella. If Captain Morrison hadn't been suspicious enough to verify the appointment, if Alexander himself hadn't arrived at the medical wing when he did, the outcome could have been catastrophic. He found Isabella in the garden with her governess, chasing butterflies among the roses. For a moment, watching her laugh and run in the sunshine, it was possible to forget about the darkness that had been lurking so close to their lives. But Alexander knew that innocence was fragile, and that protecting it required constant vigilance. The Meridian group had been stopped this time, but they were still out there, and they would undoubtedly try again. As Isabella ran over to show him a particularly beautiful butterfly she had been observing, Alexander made a silent promise. He would do everything in his power to ensure that she could continue to chase butterflies and enjoy her childhood, even as he worked to eliminate the threats that sought to steal that innocence away. The investigation into the Meridian group was just beginning, but Alexander was determined to see it through to the end, no matter how long it took or what resources it required. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost, and protecting children from those who would exploit their vulnerability was certainly one of them. 3 weeks after the incident at Ravenshallow Palace, Prince Alexander found himself in the secure communications center of the palace, participating in an encrypted video conference with heads of state and intelligence chiefs from around the world. The mahogany-paneled room was equipped with the most advanced communication technology available, allowing for secure conversations with multiple participants across different continents. On the main screen, Alexander could see President Maria Santos of the Republic of Valdania, whose own daughter had been one of the victims of a similar attack 6 months earlier. Her face bore the weight of a parent who had watched helplessly as her child's personality slowly changed in subtle but disturbing ways. "Your Highness," President Santos began, her accented English carrying both formality and genuine warmth, "I cannot express how grateful I am that you were able to prevent what happened to Sophia from happening to Princess Isabella. The past 6 months have been difficult." Alexander leaned forward, his expression serious. "How is Sophia doing now, Madam President?" Dr. Thornfield mentioned that some research is being conducted into potential treatments. President Santos's composure wavered slightly. "The changes are subtle but persistent. She's become much more compliant, less questioning of authority. Her teachers noticed first. She stopped asking the challenging questions that had always been characteristic of her. Her curiosity about the world seems diminished." The screen split to show Prime Minister James Hartwell of the neighboring Kingdom of Wessex, whose 13-year-old son had been targeted but, like Isabella, had been protected by alert security personnel. Beside him appeared Director Chen Wei of the Far Eastern Intelligence Consortium, whose granddaughter had not been so fortunate. "The pattern is becoming clearer with each case we examine," Director Chen said in his precise, measured tone. "The Meridian Group appears to be targeting the next generation of world leaders with surgical precision. They're not interested in immediate political change, they're planning for decades into the future." Prime Minister Hartwell nodded grimly. "Our investigation has uncovered evidence that they've been researching genetic markers associated with leadership traits. They're not just randomly targeting prominent families. They're specifically seeking out children who show early signs of intelligence, independence, and leadership potential. That's consistent with what we've learned from Dr. Vasquez," Alexander replied. "Though she's still not cooperating fully, our interrogation specialists have managed to extract some information about their selection criteria. They maintain detailed psychological profiles on children from influential families, tracking their development from early childhood." President Santos shuddered visibly. The idea that someone has been watching our children, studying them like laboratory specimens, it's monstrous. The conversation was interrupted as another participant joined the secure conference. Director Anne Blackwood, who had been leading the investigation from the British side, along with Dr. Thornfield and a woman Alexander didn't immediately recognize. "Your Highness, distinguished colleagues," Director Blackwood began, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Rachel Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, who is a leading expert in pharmaceutical psychology and has been analyzing the compound used in these attacks." Dr. Morrison was a woman in her 50s, with graying brown hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses.
She wore the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who had been spending long hours in a laboratory. "Thank you, Director Blackwood, Dr. Sensio," Morrison said, consulting a tablet in her hands. "I'm afraid I have both good news and disturbing news about the compound we've been studying. The good news is that we believe we've identified the key components and may be able to develop a treatment to reverse some of the effects." "And the disturbing news?" Prime Minister Hartwell asked. "The compound is far more sophisticated than we initially realized. It appears to be the result of at least a decade of research and development, incorporating cutting-edge neuroscience and pharmaceutical technology. The level of investment required to develop this suggests we're dealing with an organization with virtually unlimited resources." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of resources are we talking about?" "Based on the complexity of the compound and the advanced research required to develop it," Dr. Morrison replied, "we estimate the Meridian Group has invested somewhere between $50 and $100 million in this project alone. They have access to world-class laboratories, the finest pharmaceutical researchers, and probably several years' worth of human testing data." Director Chen leaned forward. "Human testing data?" "I'm afraid so," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "The compound we analyzed shows clear signs of refinement through multiple iterations. This wasn't their first attempt. They've been testing and improving this formula, probably using subjects who weren't in positions where the effects would be easily noticed." President Santos covered her mouth with her hand. "You're saying there may be other children out there who were used as test subjects?" "It's likely," Dr. Morrison admitted. "Probably children from less prominent families, or perhaps children in institutional care where changes in behavior might be attributed to other factors." The full horror of what they were dealing with began to sink in for everyone on the call. This wasn't just an attack on a few high-profile targets. It was part of a larger program of human experimentation that had probably affected dozens or even hundreds of children. "We need to find these children," Alexander declared. "If there's a treatment that can help them, they deserve access to it just as much as our own children do." "Agreed," said Prime Minister Hartwell. "But that raises the question of how we locate them. The Meridian Group has been careful to cover their tracks," Director Blackwood spoke up. "We may have a lead on that front. The financial investigation into Dr. Vasquez's background has revealed connections to several shell companies that appear to be funding medical research in developing countries. We believe they may have been conducting their human trials through fake charitable medical programs." "Fake charities?" President Santos asked. "Organizations that appeared to be providing medical care to underserved populations," Director Blackwood explained. "But instead of legitimate treatments, they were using the opportunity to test their compound on vulnerable children whose parents couldn't afford proper medical care, or who might not notice subtle behavioral changes." Alexander felt his anger rising. The exploitation of vulnerable populations to test weapons designed to attack the children of the powerful represented a level of cynicism and cruelty that was difficult to comprehend. "I want those operations shut down immediately," he said. "Whatever diplomatic pressure needs to be applied, whatever resources need to be deployed, we cannot allow this to continue." Director Chen nodded. "We're already working with international law enforcement agencies to identify and close these operations. But the Meridian Group has been clever about distributing their activities across multiple jurisdictions, making it difficult to coordinate a comprehensive response." Dr. Bradlett Thornfield, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the conversation, looked up. "There's another issue we need to discuss. We've been analyzing the specific compound that was intended for Princess Isabella, and it appears to be different from the ones used in the other attacks." "Different how?" Alexander asked. "More potent," Dr. Thornfield replied. "The dosage and concentration suggest it was specifically formulated for a child of Isabella's age and approximate weight. This wasn't a generic compound, it was custom-made for her." The implications of this revelation were staggering. The Meridian Group hadn't just been targeting Isabella as part of a general program. They had been specifically planning her attack for what could have been months or even years. "They've been watching her that closely?" President Santos asked. "It appears so," Thornfield confirmed. "The level of customization in the compound suggests they had detailed information about her medical history, her growth patterns, and probably her psychological profile as well." Prime Minister Hartwell's expression darkened.
That level of surveillance suggests they have sources inside our respective governments or security services. They're not just operating from the outside, they have people on the inside providing them with information. Director Blackwood nodded grimly. We've begun conducting security reviews of everyone with access to sensitive information about the royal family. It's a delicate process, but it's necessary. The same is true for our administration, President Santos added. We've discovered that someone had been accessing Sophia's medical records from within our own health ministry. The investigation is ongoing. Alexander realized that the threat was even more pervasive than they had initially understood. The Meridian Group wasn't just an external enemy. They had managed to infiltrate the very institutions that were supposed to protect the children they were targeting. We need to coordinate our internal investigations, Alexander said. If they have people placed in multiple governments, there may be patterns we can identify by comparing our findings. Agreed, Director Chen replied. We're establishing a joint task force to share intelligence and coordinate our responses. But we need to be careful about operational security. If there are moles in our respective organizations, we can't afford to have our countermeasures compromised. Dr. Morrison cleared her throat. There's one more thing we need to discuss about the treatment possibilities. While we're optimistic about developing a remedy for the compound's effects, the process will require extensive testing to ensure safety. We're looking at a timeline of at least 18 months before we have a proven treatment. 18 months? President Santos asked, her voice reflecting the desperation of a parent watching her child suffer. Possibly longer, Dr. Morrison admitted. We're dealing with a compound that affects brain chemistry in ways we don't fully understand yet. We can't afford to rush the development of a treatment that could potentially make things worse. Alexander could see the pain in President Santos's eyes, and he felt a deep sympathy for her situation. The uncertainty of not knowing whether her daughter would ever fully recover must be agonizing. In the meantime, Alexander said, we need to focus on preventing any additional attacks and tracking down everyone involved in this conspiracy. Every day we delay gives them more opportunities to harm other children. The intelligence sharing agreement we're establishing today should help with that, Director Blackwood said. We'll be pooling our resources and expertise to track down every member of the Meridian Group and shut down their entire operation. As the conference continued, participants shared additional details about their investigations, coordinated future activities, and established protocols for ongoing communication. The scope of the international cooperation that was emerging was unprecedented, but so was the threat they were facing. When the call finally ended, after more than 3 hours, Alexander remained in the communications center, reflecting on everything he had learned. The Meridian Group's conspiracy was far more extensive and sophisticated than anyone had initially realized, and the number of potential victims was heartbreakingly large. But the response was equally impressive. Governments that might normally compete or disagree were working together with remarkable cooperation when it came to protecting their children. The attack on the next generation of leaders had unified the international community in a way that few other threats could have accomplished. Walking back toward the family quarters, Alexander thought about Isabella, who was probably finishing her afternoon lessons with no awareness of the global conspiracy that had targeted her or the international effort that was now working to protect her and others like her. He found her in the library, carefully reading a book about marine biology. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with the innocent smile that reminded him exactly what they were fighting to protect. Papa, she said, did you know that dolphins can recognize themselves in mirrors? It means they're self-aware, just like humans are. Alexander sat down beside her, marveling at the curiosity and intelligence that the Meridian Group had tried to steal from her. That's fascinating, sweetheart. What else did you learn today? As Isabella enthusiastically shared her discoveries about ocean life, Alexander reflected on the bitter irony that the very traits that made her a target, her intelligence, her curiosity, her leadership potential, were also the qualities that would help her generation solve the problems the world would face in the future. The Meridian Group had underestimated the determination of parents to protect their children, and the willingness of nations to cooperate when the next generation was threatened. Their sophisticated plan was beginning to unravel, but Alexander knew the fight was far from over. The underground bunker beneath the Swiss Alps was a marvel of modern engineering and international cooperation. Built into the solid rock of the mountain, it housed the newly established International Task Force against the Meridian Group,
a joint operation involving intelligence agencies from 7 nations. Prince Alexander stood before a wall of monitors displaying data, photographs, and surveillance footage from around the world as he received the latest briefing on Operation Clearsight. Director Blackwood stood beside a large digital map showing locations across 4 continents where Meridian Group activities had been identified. Red dots marked confirmed operations, yellow indicated suspected sites, and blue showed locations where victims had been identified. "Your Highness," she began, gesturing to the map. "In the 6 weeks since we established this task force, we've made remarkable progress. We've identified and shut down 12 fake medical charity operations, arrested 43 individuals connected to the conspiracy, and rescued over 200 children who had been subjected to various forms of experimental treatments." Alexander studied the map, noting the global scope of the operation. "What's the status of the children who were rescued? Are they receiving proper medical care?" Dr. Morrison, who had become the task force's chief medical advisor, consulted her tablet. "We've established treatment centers in 6 countries to provide specialized care for the affected children. The good news is that many of the children who were subjected to early versions of the compound are showing promising responses to our preliminary treatments. And the bad news? The children who received the more recent, sophisticated versions of the compound are going to be more challenging to treat. The neural pathways that were altered are more complex, and the changes appear to be more deeply embedded." Captain Morrison entered the briefing room carrying a secure tablet. "Your Highness, we've just received intelligence from our operation in Eastern Europe. Dr. Vasquez has finally agreed to cooperate in exchange for protective custody for her sister." Alexander turned his attention to the captain. "What has she revealed?" "The Meridian Group structure is more complex than we initially thought," Morrison replied, activating a holographic display that showed an intricate organizational chart. "They operate through multiple cells, each with limited knowledge of the others. Vasquez was part of the pharmaceutical development arm, but she knew little about the recruitment, finance, or operational planning divisions. But she has provided us with crucial information about their leadership," Director Blackwood added. "The group is controlled by a council of 5 individuals, each representing different aspects of their operation: finance, research, operations, intelligence, and strategic planning." A new image appeared on the central monitor. A photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes. "This is Dr. Marcus Thornton," Blackwood continued. "According to Vasquez, he's the head of the research division and one of the founding members of the Meridian Group." Alexander studied the photograph. There was something in the man's expression that suggested both intelligence and a complete lack of empathy, the look of someone who could order experiments on children without losing a moment's sleep. Thornton is a brilliant neuropharmacologist who was dismissed from several prestigious research institutions for ethical violations. Dr. Revenot-Claussy, Morrison explained. "He believes that human behavior can and should be controlled through chemical modification, and he sees the Meridian Group's program as a grand social experiment." "Where is he now?" "Unknown," Captain Morrison admitted. "He disappeared from his last known address 3 years ago, shortly after the Meridian Group's program began targeting high-profile children, but we have leads on the other council members." The display shifted to show photographs of 4 other individuals. Alexander recognized one of them immediately, a woman he had met at several diplomatic functions. "Lady Margaret Ashford," he said, unable to hide his shock. "I know her. She's been a guest at state dinners, a donor to various charities, and according to Dr. Faradsky Vasquez, she's the head of the Meridian Group's finance division," Director Blackwood confirmed. "Lady Ashford has been using her social connections and philanthropic activities to gather intelligence on potential targets and to provide funding for the organization's operations." Alexander felt a deep sense of betrayal. Lady Ashford had been in his home, had met Isabella, had smiled and made pleasant conversation while secretly planning to harm his daughter. "She's been under surveillance for the past 2 weeks, Captain Morrison said. "We're building a case against her, but we need to be careful. She has connections throughout the British establishment, and we can't afford to move against her until we're certain we can make the charges stick." "What about the others?" Director Blackwood indicated the remaining photographs. "Victor Chen, no relation to Director Chen, is a former CIA operative who heads their intelligence operations. Rebecca Santos is a tech entrepreneur who manages their cyber warfare capabilities. And James Morrison, again no relation to our Captain Morrison, is a former military officer who oversees their field operations. Alexander noted the bitter irony that people sharing names with their allies were among their enemies. How did these people come together? What's their ultimate goal? According to Vasquez, Dr. Morrison replied, they all share a belief that democracy and free market capitalism are inherently unstable and that the world would be better governed by a small group of enlightened individuals who could make decisions without being constrained by popular opinion or political competition. They want to create a generation of leaders who will implement their vision without realizing they're being controlled, Director Blackwood added. Children who grow up to become presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs, but whose decision-making processes have been subtly altered to favor the Meridian Group's preferred policies. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. They weren't just targeting individual children, they were attempting to reshape the entire future of human governance. Your Highness, a technician called out from one of the monitoring stations. We're receiving a priority communication from the field team in Romania. The main screen switched to show Agent Sarah Collins, one of the task force's most experienced operatives, standing outside what appeared to be an abandoned industrial facility. Her face was grim, and there was urgency in her voice. Director Blackwood, Your Highness, Collins began. We've discovered something at the facility outside Bucharest. You need to see this. The camera feed switched to show the interior of the building. What Alexander saw made his stomach turn. It was clearly a medical facility, but one designed for experimentation rather than healing. There were dozens of examination rooms, each equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. How many children? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. We found evidence of at least 300 individual subjects over the past 2 years, Collins replied. Most appear to have been homeless children or orphans. The record-keeping is meticulous. They documented everything. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, studying the images. Those monitoring devices, they were tracking neural responses to the compound in real time. This wasn't just testing. It was systematic optimization of the formula based on observed effects. Are there any children still at the facility? No, sir. The place was abandoned about a month ago, shortly before our investigation became public, but we've found records that may help us locate some of the victims. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of human suffering that had been inflicted in pursuit of the Meridian Group's goals. Hundreds of vulnerable children had been used as laboratory animals to perfect a weapon designed to attack the next generation of world leaders. Collins, Director Blackwood said, I want every piece of evidence in that facility documented and preserved. We're going to need it to prosecute these monsters. Already in progress, Director. But there's something else you need to know. You always hear what's going. We found evidence that the facility was just one of several. There are references to similar operations in at least 6 other countries. The briefing room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. The Meridian Group's operations were even more extensive than they had realized. We need to accelerate our timeline, Alexander declared. Every day these facilities remain operational. More children are at risk. Agreed, Director Blackwood replied. I'm authorizing simultaneous raids on all suspected facilities. We'll coordinate with local authorities in each country to ensure we can move quickly and effectively. Over the next several hours, the operations center transformed into a real-time command post coordinating activities across multiple continents. Alexander watched as teams moved against Meridian Group facilities in Brazil, Thailand, Kenya, and other locations around the world. The results were both encouraging and heartbreaking. They rescued dozens of children who were still being held at various facilities, but they also uncovered evidence of hundreds more who had been subjected to experimental treatments and then released back into orphanages or onto the streets, with their conditions unmonitored. Your Highness, Captain Morrison approached with a secure communication device. President Santos is requesting an urgent conversation. Alexander took the device and saw President Santos's face on the small screen. She looked exhausted, but there was hope in her eyes that hadn't been there during their previous conversations. Alexander, she said, using the informal address they had agreed upon during their cooperation, I wanted you to be among the first to know. Sophia spoke up in class today. Spoke up? She challenged her history teacher's interpretation of a historical event.
President Santos explained, her voice thick with emotion. It's the first time in months that she's questioned authority or expressed an independent opinion about anything. Alexander felt a surge of hope. Dr. Morrison's preliminary treatments are working? It appears so. The changes are small, but they're in the right direction. Her doctors are cautiously optimistic that with continued treatment, we may be able to restore much of her original personality. This was the first genuinely good news they had received since the investigation began. If the treatments could help Sophia, they could potentially help all of the affected children. That's wonderful news, Alexander said. Please keep us informed of her progress. After ending the call, Alexander shared the good news with the rest of the team. The mood in the operations center became noticeably more optimistic as word spread that recovery was possible for the victims. But the celebration was short-lived. Agent Collins appeared on the main screen again, this time from a different location. "Director, Your Highness," she began, "we've intercepted communications suggesting that the Meridian Group is planning to accelerate their timeline. Intelligence indicates they're going to attempt multiple simultaneous operations within the next 72 hours. Multiple operations? Director Blackwood asked. At least 12 targets across 6 countries, Collins confirmed. They know we're closing in, and they're trying to complete as many of their priority objectives as possible before we can stop them. Alexander felt his blood run cold. The Meridian Group's priority targets would likely include some of the most important children in the world, future leaders whose compromise could affect global stability for decades to come. Do we know who the targets are? Some of them, Collins replied. The list includes the children of several heads of state, including some who are participating in this task force. Alexander's first thought was of Isabella, safely protected at Raven's Hollow Palace. But then he thought of all the other children around the world whose parents might not have the same level of security resources. We need to warn everyone immediately, he said. Every government with children who might be at risk needs to be alerted. Already in progress, Director Blackwood confirmed. We're sending emergency security advisories to our partner nations, and we're offering additional protective resources to anyone who needs them. As the operations center buzzed with activity, Alexander reflected on how much their understanding of the threat had evolved since that morning when he had stopped a fake nurse from injecting his daughter. What had seemed like an isolated incident had revealed a global conspiracy of unprecedented scope and ambition, but they were fighting back. The international cooperation that had developed in response to the Meridian Group's threat was proving that when children were endangered, traditional diplomatic and political divisions could be set aside in favor of common purpose. The next 72 hours would be critical. If they could prevent the Meridian Group's final wave of attacks and capture the remaining leadership, they could finally end the threat that had cast a shadow over the world's children. Alexander looked up at the map showing the global scope of their operations, and made a silent promise to every child whose life had been affected by this conspiracy. Justice would be served, and the future would belong to those who had been born to lead it, not to those who sought to control it from the shadows. The tension in the International Task Force Operations Center had reached its peak as the 72-hour countdown entered its final 6 hours. Prince Alexander stood before the master control panel, watching as real-time intelligence updates flooded in from around the world. The Meridian Group's desperate final gambit was unfolding across multiple continents, and the task force was racing against time to prevent what could be the most devastating attack on the next generation of world leaders in modern history. Your Highness, Director Blackwood called out, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the operations center. We've confirmed simultaneous movements toward targets in Japan, Canada, Germany, and Australia. The coordinated nature of these operations suggests this is their final push. Alexander studied the tactical displays showing the locations of task force teams positioned around the world. Each red dot represented a potential attack on a child, each blue dot a protective force working to prevent it. The scope of the operation was unprecedented in international law enforcement cooperation. Status report from Tokyo, came a voice over the communication system. Agent Tanaka's face appeared on one of the smaller monitors, showing her positioned outside a prestigious international school in the heart of Japan's capital. We've intercepted a team of 3 operatives attempting to infiltrate the school where Prime Minister Sato's grandson attends, Tanaka reported. They were posing as educational consultants, with documentation claiming they were there to administer cognitive development assessments to gifted students.
Cognitive development assessments? Dr. Morrison asked from her position at the medical analysis station. That's a clever cover. It would give them access to multiple high-value targets while appearing to provide a legitimate service. Alexander felt a chill at the sophistication of the deception. The Meridian Group had learned from their earlier failures and was now using covers that would be much harder to detect and challenge. "Have you secured the operatives?" Director Blackwood asked. "Affirmative. All three are in custody and we've recovered their medical equipment." "Dr. Morrison, we're transmitting the compound analysis to your team now." As data began flowing to Dr. Morrison's workstation, Agent Chen's voice crackled over the communications from Sydney. "Operation Boomerang here. We've successfully prevented an infiltration at the Australian Minister of Defence's residence. 2 operatives posed as private tutors hired through a prestigious educational agency. The same pattern," Alexander observed. "They're using educational and medical covers to gain access to children in their most secure environments." Captain Morrison approached with a tablet displaying incoming intelligence. "Your Highness, we've identified the source of their coordination. Communications intercepts show they're being directed from a mobile command center somewhere in the Mediterranean. The signal is moving, suggesting it's aboard a ship or aircraft. Can we track it? We're working with naval forces from several countries to locate the source. But the signal is sophisticated. They're using advanced encryption and signal masking technology." Dr. Morrison looked up from her analysis workstation, her expression grave. "Your Highness, I've analyzed the compounds recovered from the Tokyo operation. This is a new formulation, much more potent than anything we've seen before. It appears designed to cause immediate personality changes rather than the gradual alterations we observed in previous attacks." "Immediate changes?" Alexander asked, dreading the implications. "The previous compounds were designed to alter neural development over months or years," Dr. Morrison explained. "This new version would cause rapid, dramatic changes in personality and cognitive function within days or weeks. It's essentially a chemical lobotomy disguised as a vaccination." The operations center fell silent as everyone absorbed this horrifying revelation. The Meridian Group wasn't just trying to influence the next generation of leaders, they were attempting to destroy the minds of children who showed exceptional promise. "Sir," Agent Collins's voice came through the communication system from her position in Berlin. "We've encountered a problem. The team we intercepted here was carrying diplomatic credentials from a country that's not part of our task force. They're claiming diplomatic immunity." Alexander exchanged a look with Director Blackwood. The possibility that the Meridian Group had infiltrated foreign diplomatic services added an entirely new dimension to the threat. "Which country?" Blackwood asked. "I'd rather not say over an open channel," Collins replied, "but we need guidance on how to proceed. Local authorities are reluctant to arrest individuals with diplomatic status." Alexander made a decision that he knew could have significant diplomatic consequences. "Agent Collins, this is Prince Alexander. You have my authorization to treat this as a matter of international security that supersedes diplomatic protocols. Detain the individuals, and we'll sort out the diplomatic issues later." "Understood, Your Highness. Moving to detain now." As Collins's team moved into action, a new alert appeared on the central monitoring system. Agent Rodriguez's face appeared from Canada, where she had been overseeing protection for the Prime Minister's daughter. "Operations Center, we have a situation here. We've prevented the immediate threat, but we've discovered something that requires your immediate attention." "Go ahead, Agent Rodriguez." "The operatives we captured were carrying detailed dossiers not just on their primary target, but on over 50 children from prominent families across North America. This wasn't just a single operation. They were planning an entire campaign." Dr. Morrison pulled up the transmitted data on her workstation. "These psychological profiles are incredibly detailed," she said, scrolling through the information. "They have information about learning styles, personality traits, family relationships, even favorite foods and activities. Someone has been studying these children for years." Alexander felt a deep anger building within him. The idea that his daughter and dozens of other children had been under such intensive surveillance without their family's knowledge was a violation that went beyond the immediate physical threat. "Your Highness," came a new voice over the communications system. It was Agent Williams calling from the field team positioned outside Lady Margaret Ashford's estate in the English countryside. "Agent Williams, what's your status?"
Sir, Lady Ashford has barricaded herself inside her manor house and is refusing to surrender. But we've intercepted communications indicating she's in contact with the mobile command center in the Mediterranean. She appears to be coordinating the remaining operations. Can you move in? We're prepared to, but there's a complication. Our surveillance indicates there may be children inside the house with her. Alexander felt his blood run cold. Children? Yes, sir. We've identified at least 3 young individuals who entered the property earlier today. We believe they may be victims of previous Meridian Group operations who are being held for further experimentation. The situation had become even more complex. They couldn't risk harming innocent children, but they couldn't allow Lady Ashford to continue coordinating attacks around the world. Agent Williams, maintain your position but do not attempt entry until we can develop a plan to ensure the children's safety, Alexander ordered. Dr. Morrison looked up from her workstation with alarm. Your Highness, I'm receiving reports from the medical teams treating recovered victims. Several children who had been showing improvement have suddenly relapsed. Their conditions have deteriorated rapidly over the past few hours. Could this be related to the compounds the current operatives were carrying? Possibly. Or, Dr. Morrison paused, checking her data again. There may be a secondary activation mechanism built into the original compounds, something that can be triggered remotely. The implications were staggering. The Meridian Group might be able to activate or intensify the effects of their compounds in children who had been treated months or years earlier. Get me President Santos immediately, Alexander ordered. Within minutes, President Santos appeared on the main screen, her face showing panic. Alexander, something's happening to Sophia. She collapsed an hour ago and hasn't responded since. The doctors can't explain what's causing it. Madam President, we believe the Meridian Group may have a way to remotely activate or intensify the effects of their compounds. Sophia and other recovering children may be experiencing a coordinated attack. President Santos's composure finally broke. You're saying they can hurt her even though she's in our most secure medical facility? We don't know for certain, but it's a possibility we have to consider. Dr. Watson, Morrison is working on countermeasures now. As Dr. Jean, Morrison worked frantically at her station, trying to develop some kind of medical intervention. New reports began flooding in from around the world. Children who had been recovering from previous Meridian Group attacks were suddenly experiencing severe symptoms. The scope of the remote activation capability was becoming clear. They could potentially affect hundreds of children simultaneously. I've got something, Dr. Morrison called out. The activation appears to be triggered by a specific radio frequency. If we can jam that frequency, we might be able to stop the progression of symptoms. Do it, Alexander ordered. It's not that simple. The frequency appears to be embedded in normal communication signals. Jamming it could disrupt civilian communications across large areas. Alexander was faced with an impossible choice: potentially disrupt communications for millions of people, or allow the Meridian Group to continue harming children around the world. Agent Williams, Alexander called out to the team at Lady Ashford's estate. Can you identify the source of the activation signal? We're working on it, sir. Our technical team believes the signal is being broadcast from inside the manor house. If we can stop the transmission at its source, but you can't enter without risking the children inside. Correct, sir. We need another approach. Suddenly, Captain Morrison approached Alexander with urgent news. Your Highness, we've located the mobile command center in the Mediterranean. It's aboard a luxury yacht registered in international waters. Naval forces are moving to intercept, but they're claiming they're in neutral territory. Alexander realized that the endgame was finally approaching. The Meridian Group's leadership was consolidating their operations aboard a ship where they believed they would be safe from arrest, while their last remaining ground operative was holed up in a manor house surrounded by law enforcement. Captain, I want that yacht boarded regardless of territorial claims. The lives of children around the world are at stake. Sir, that could create a significant international incident. Then we'll deal with the consequences later. Right now, stopping the Meridian Group takes precedence over diplomatic niceties. As naval forces moved toward the yacht, Dr. Morrison made a breakthrough. I think I can create a counter-frequency that will neutralize the activation signal, but I need to get close enough to the source to calibrate it properly. How close? Within a few hundred meters of the transmission source. Alexander looked at the tactical display showing Agent Williams' team positioned around Lady Ashford's manor. Agent Williams, Dr. Morrison is going to join your team,
She has a device that may be able to stop the transmission that's harming children around the world. Understood, sir. But she'll be in significant danger if she gets that close to the house. Dr. Morrison was already gathering her equipment. I understand the risks, but I can't sit here while children are suffering because of something I might be able to stop. As Dr. Morrison departed for the field, reports began coming in from the naval operation. The yacht had been intercepted and boarded, revealing a sophisticated mobile command center from which the Meridian Group's final operations were being coordinated. Your Highness, came the voice of Admiral Richardson over the communication system, we've secured the yacht and arrested 5 individuals, including Dr. Marcus Thornton. The ship's computer systems contain what appears to be the complete operational database of the Meridian Group. Finally, they had captured the architect of the conspiracy that had threatened children around the world. But the crisis wasn't over yet. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio from her position outside Lady Ashford's manor. I'm in position and ready to activate the counter frequency. But I need a clear line of sight to the transmission source. Agent Williams, can you provide that? We're going to have to breach the house, sir. There's no other way to get Dr. Coles. Morrison close enough to the source. Alexander made the decision that would end the Meridian Group's threat once and for all. Do it. But remember, the safety of those children is the top priority. As the tactical team moved into the manor house, Alexander watched the operation unfold on multiple screens. The next few minutes would determine whether they could finally end the nightmare that had begun with a fake nurse trying to inject his daughter. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the communication system as the team breached the manor. Then came Dr. Morrison's voice. I have visual on the transmission device. Activating counter frequency now. Within moments, reports began flooding in from around the world. Children who had been experiencing severe symptoms were beginning to stabilize. Sophia Santos opened her eyes in her hospital bed. The remote activation capability had been neutralized. Lady Ashford is in custody. Agent Williams reported. We've also recovered 3 children who appear to be in good health despite their captivity. As the dust settled on the global operation, Alexander reflected on how a single moment of vigilance had led to the unraveling of one of the most sophisticated conspiracies in modern history. The fake nurse who had tried to harm Isabella had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately saved hundreds of children around the world. The Meridian Group's leadership was in custody, their operations had been shut down, and their victims were receiving the medical care they needed. The next generation of leaders would grow up free from the shadow of chemical manipulation, able to develop their own thoughts and make their own decisions about the future of the world. 6 months later, Prince Alexander stood in the same garden where he had found Isabella chasing butterflies after the first incident. She was there again, but this time she was playing with Sophia Santos and several other children, whose lives had been affected by the Meridian Group's conspiracy. Dr. Morrison's treatments had been largely successful. While some effects of the compounds lingered in certain children, the majority had recovered their natural personalities and cognitive abilities. More importantly, they had all survived to become the leaders they were meant to be, shaped by their own experiences and values rather than by chemical manipulation. As Alexander watched the children play, he was reminded that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in battles won or enemies defeated, but in the simple sound of children's laughter echoing through a palace garden on a sunny afternoon.